The morning I walked into the Hargrove Hotel, I was wearing my old Navy windbreaker, the one with the frayed zipper pull that my wife had been threatening to throw away for 3 years. I had a cracked leather wallet in my back pocket and mud on my boots from the garden. I looked exactly like what my son-in-law had always believed I was. A retired schoolteacher from a small town who didn't belong anywhere near marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I didn't care. I had a reason to be there. My daughter had called me the night before, not to talk, just to cry. She didn't explain much. She never did anymore. But I heard it, that particular silence underneath the sobbing that told me things were worse than she was letting on. I'd been hearing that silence for 2 years, ever since she married Thaddeus. I should have said something earlier. I know that now, but she was 34 years old, and I'd spent her whole life trying not to be the kind of father who pushed too hard. So I waited, and I listened, and every time I visited and saw my granddaughter wearing shoes 2 sizes too small, or noticed the refrigerator was half empty, I told myself she would find her way out on her own. That Tuesday morning, I wasn't waiting anymore. Thaddeus worked the front desk at the Hargrove, not a regular desk job. He was the guest services manager, which he made sure everyone knew. He wore a pressed charcoal jacket with a gold pin on the lapel and carried himself like a man who believed his job title said something about his worth as a human being. He had told me once, without a trace of irony, that he curated guest experiences for discerning travelers. I was a high school history teacher for 31 years. I know what words sound like when they're doing work they're not qualified for. The lobby was quiet when I walked in, mid-morning on a Tuesday. A few business people moving through with rolling bags, a couple near the concierge desk studying a city map. I stood just inside the entrance and let my eyes adjust to the light. The floors were white marble with thin gold veining. The ceiling was high and coffered. Everything smelled faintly of orange blossom and money. Thaddeus was at the desk before I spotted him. He saw me first. I watched his expression move through something, surprise, then irritation, then the very particular kind of contempt that people wear when they want you to feel it without being able to prove they meant it that way. He excused himself from the young woman he was assisting and walked toward me with the kind of deliberate pace that was designed to make me feel I was already an inconvenience. "What are you doing here?" he said, not quietly. "I came to see you," I said. "I was in the area and thought we could grab a coffee. There's a cafe across the street." He looked at me the way you look at something you've stepped over on the sidewalk. His eyes moved from my boots to my jacket to my face, and he didn't bother hiding any of it. "This isn't a good time," he said, "and honestly, I'd appreciate it if you didn't come to my workplace unannounced. It doesn't look good." "I didn't look good," I repeated. "You know what I mean." I did know what he meant, and he knew I knew. That was the point. "We have important guests checking in this afternoon," he said, lowering his voice now that a concierge had glanced over. "I really can't be dealing with family drop-ins right now. Why don't you head back to," he gestured vaguely, "wherever, and I'll have Dinah call you when things settle down." Dinah. My daughter. He had just referred to my daughter as the person who would contact me when he was ready to deal with me. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about my granddaughter, who was 6 years old, and had started going quiet in a way that 6-year-olds shouldn't be quiet. I thought about the phone call the night before. "Okay," I said. "I'll head out." He was already turning back to the desk when I said it. He didn't even acknowledge it. I walked back through the lobby and out through the glass doors into the morning air, and I sat down on a bench across the street, and I looked at the entrance to that hotel for a long time. Then I took out my phone and made a call. I should back up. I taught history for 3 decades. I was not a wealthy man by any measure anyone in that hotel lobby would recognize. I drove a 12-year-old Subaru. I owned a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in a quiet town, and I had a vegetable garden and a dog named after a Supreme Court justice, and I considered myself a contented person. After my wife passed 6 years ago, I had learned, slowly and with difficulty, how to be contented on my own. What most people didn't know about me, what I had no reason to advertise and every reason to be private about, was that my wife had come from a different kind of family than mine. Her father had built a regional freight company over 40 years, and when he died, He left everything to her. She managed it quietly and carefully. When she passed, she left it to me with a note that said simply, "Do something good with it." I had spent 6 years trying to figure out what that meant. I kept her father's company. I hired good people to run it. I sat on the board and learned more about logistics and regional freight than I had ever expected to know. The company had grown. I had reinvested. I had diversified. Carefully and without drama. I was not flashy about any of it because my wife had not been flashy about any of it, and I respected her way of doing things. My daughter knew some of this. Not all of it. She knew her grandfather had left us comfortable. She didn't know the full scope. Partly because I hadn't wanted money to be the reason people treated me differently, and partly because I had seen what the knowledge of money did to some families, and I wanted no part of that. Thaddeus did not know any of it. He had made his assessment of me on our first meeting and never revisited it. Now. Back to that bench outside the Hargrove. The call I made was to a man named Prescott Aldine. Prescott was the general manager of a small but serious real estate and hospitality investment group that I had quietly partnered with 18 months earlier. We had been looking for some time at a property in the city, a hotel property. In fact, the specific property we had been looking at was the Hargrove. The owners were selling. It was not public knowledge yet, but the discussions had been ongoing for months, and our group was the leading offer. We were days away from a formal agreement. Prescott answered on the second ring. "I need to move up the timeline," I said. He paused. "How far up?" "Today. This afternoon, if possible." Another pause. "That's aggressive." "I know. I also need something else. I need to book a suite for tonight. I need it done properly, under my name, full reservation, the works, and I need it confirmed with the management team directly." There was a silence. Then Prescott said, "Are you doing what I think you're doing?" "Probably," I said. He laughed a little. Not unkindly. "Give me 2 hours." I went and had a quiet lunch by myself at a diner 3 blocks away. I had the fish sandwich and a cup of coffee that needed improvement, but I drank it anyway. I read the newspaper on my phone and thought about my daughter and tried not to rehearse what I was going to say when everything was over. At 1:30, Prescott called back. "It's done," he said. "Penthouse suite tonight. Your name on the reservation. The property director has been notified. They know who you are." "And the other matter? Our attorneys sent over the final terms this morning. If the ownership team signs today, which their lawyers say they're ready to do, you'll be the majority stakeholder in the Hargrove by close of business." I sat with that for a moment. "One more thing," I said. "Is there any chance you know who manages their guest services department?" A pause. Keys clicking. "Thaddeus Rowe. Been there 3 years. Why?" "Just curious," I said. I gave myself another hour. I walked. The city was mild, and the streets were full of ordinary people doing ordinary things. And I thought about my wife, the way I still do sometimes in the middle of important moments, the way I reach for her even now when I want to share something. She would have found all of this quietly funny. She had a dry sense of humor that most people missed. She would have said something understated and perfect, and then gone back to her crossword. I walked back to the Hargrove at 3:15. The lobby was busier now. A group had just checked in, 8 or 9 people with the efficient, self-contained movement of business travelers who do this every week. The concierge was engaged with someone about dinner reservations. A porter moved luggage with practiced economy. Thaddeus was at the front desk. He saw me come through the doors. I watched his expression go through that same sequence again. Surprise, irritation, contempt. But this time there was an undercurrent of something else. Anger, maybe, or the particular indignation of a man who believed he had already handled a problem and couldn't understand why it had returned. He came toward me faster this time. He didn't bother with the deliberate pace. "I thought I made myself clear this morning," he said, and his voice was low but not quiet enough. The young woman at the desk glanced up. "You can't just walk in here whenever you feel like it. This is a professional environment." "I have a reservation," I said. He stopped. "A reservation," he repeated. Penthouse suite, under my name. You can check if you'd like. He looked at me the way people look when they're trying to decide if they're being made a fool of. Then I'll give him this. He turned and went back to the desk and checked. I watched him type. I watched his posture change as he read what was on the screen. He turned back to me slowly. There seems to be a... he started. I'll wait in the lounge, I said. When you have a moment to actually assist me, I'd appreciate it. I walked past him and sat in one of the leather chairs near the window. I ordered a club soda from the passing server. I looked out at the street where I had sat on a bench that morning feeling, if I'm honest, very small is a particular kind of hurt, being dismissed by someone who married into your family. It sits in a different place than most hurts, closer to the chest. 12 minutes later, a woman in a structured gray blazer came across the lobby toward me. She had the measured confidence of someone who was very good at her job and had spent years managing situations that could go sideways if handled poorly. Mr. Calloway, she said. She had gotten my name from the reservation. That's me, I said. I'm Renata Shields, the property director. I'm so glad you could join us today. She extended her hand, and I stood and shook it. We have your suite ready whenever you'd like to go up, and I want to personally make sure your stay begins exactly as it should. She said it without any hidden emphasis, but I caught the precision of those last words. Exactly as it should. Thank you, I said. Before I go up, I was hoping we might speak briefly, privately, if possible. She nodded, no hesitation. Of course, my office is just off the lobby. I followed her. As we walked past the front desk, I did not look at Thaddeus. I didn't need to. I could feel him watching. In Renata Shields' office, which had the organized calm of someone who made 100 decisions a day and had systems for all of them, I explained what I could share. The acquisition was not yet public, but I told her that significant changes in ownership were close, that I wanted to be thoughtful about transition, and that I was interested in understanding the culture of the property firsthand. She was a professional. She listened without performing. There's one specific matter I'd like to flag, I said. Regarding your guest services manager. She didn't react visibly. She waited. I had spent the previous 6 weeks before any of the events of that morning reviewing financial records from the property as part of the due diligence process. My investment group's attorneys had flagged several irregularities in the expense reports and guest compensation logs from the guest services department. Unauthorized vouchers. Complimentary upgrades that didn't align with any guest complaint or protocol. Small amounts but consistent, and with a pattern that accountants recognize as deliberate rather than accidental. I had sat on this information while the legal review continued, but I had not forgotten it. I laid out what I knew, quietly and factually, and slid a summary across her desk. She read it without speaking. When she was done, she looked up. How long have you had this? She said. 3 weeks, I said. I wanted to make sure it was complete before bringing it forward. She nodded slowly. I appreciate that. She paused. May I ask, do you have a personal connection to this employee? I took a breath. He's married to my daughter, I said. She looked at me for a moment. The kind of look that takes a person in without judgment. I see, she said. I want to be very clear, I said. I'm not here because of this morning's incident. I'm not here for revenge. What he did this morning was embarrassing and unkind, but that's between him and his conscience. I'm here because I saw irregularities in a property I'm about to have a significant responsibility for, and I believe those irregularities are causing harm to actual people, guests who may have been denied compensation they were owed, and a staff that may have been set up to take the fall if anyone ever audited this. She tapped the edge of the document with 2 fingers. That's consistent with what I've been sensing, she said quietly. There have been 2 guest complaints in the last 8 months that I couldn't fully trace. I escalated both. The paperwork came back clean. I know, I said. The paperwork was modified. It's in the summary. She closed the folder. She stood up. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'm going to need to ask you to give me about 40 minutes. "Take what you need," I said. I went up to the penthouse suite and stood at the window and looked out at the city. The afternoon light was doing something complicated with the buildings across the way, making the windows glow amber in patches. My granddaughter loved amber. She called it honey color. She was 6 and had opinions about colors. My phone rang. "My daughter." I answered. "Dad," she said. She sounded like she'd been crying again, but also like she'd made a decision. That was a different sound. I knew her well enough to know the difference. "I'm here," I said. "Something happened," she said. "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," I said. She took a long breath. "I found things, Dad, in Thaddeus's phone. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the pediatrician's number because my phone was dead, and I found things. Messages and receipts. He told me we couldn't afford new shoes for Petra because his commission was down. He said we were barely making rent." Her voice cracked. "He bought himself a watch, Dad. A $2,000 watch, 3 months ago." "I know," I said. I meant it generally. I knew the picture, if not that specific detail. "How long have you known things were wrong?" she asked. "A while," I said, "but I needed to know more before I could do anything that would actually help." "I should have listened to you earlier." "You were figuring it out at your own pace," I said. "That's not a failure. That's just life." She was quiet for a moment. "What do I do?" "Right now, you don't do anything. Get Petra from school. Take her somewhere nice for dinner. Use my card. I'll call you tonight, and we'll talk through everything together." "Where are you?" she said. "You sound different. Calm." "I'm in a hotel," I said. She laughed a little, and it was the first real laugh I'd heard from her in what felt like months. 42 minutes after I'd left Renata Shields' office, my phone buzzed with a text from Prescott. One line. Document signed. "Congratulations." I put the phone in my pocket and went back downstairs. The lobby had the slightly heightened stillness of a place where something had just happened. One of the desk attendants was working with deliberate focus on something that didn't seem to require deliberate focus. A security officer stood near the hallway that led to the back offices, not doing anything in particular, just standing. Thaddeus was not at the desk. Renata Shields crossed the lobby toward me. "It's handled," she said quietly. "He's been escorted off the premises. We've initiated a full audit. HR is documenting everything." Did he cause a problem when you spoke to him?" She allowed herself a very small expression. "He insisted the documentation was fabricated and that there had been a misunderstanding. He mentioned his family connection to you several times. What did you say to that?" "I told him that family connections to ownership were a reason for higher scrutiny, not lower." I nodded. "I also want you to know," she said, "that when he realized the scope of the situation, he made some remarks about how you had orchestrated the entire thing to get rid of him. He was quite vocal about it. Do you believe that?" She looked at me steadily. "I believe that the irregularities existed before this morning. I believe you brought forward documentation you were legally required to share as part of the acquisition. And I believe that his behavior today, both with you and then in my office, was a significant problem regardless of anything else." "Thank you," I said, "for handling it with discretion." She nodded. "There's one more thing. A guest who was in the lobby this morning came forward after she saw what happened. She'd witnessed the exchange between the two of you. She asked if she could speak to management about what she observed." A pause. Her words were, and I'm quoting because she asked me to, "That older gentleman deserved an apology from this hotel, not a dismissal." I was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like a reasonable person," I said. That evening I called my daughter and we talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about Thaddeus, mostly, or not about what he had done. We talked about her, about what she wanted, about Petra, about what the next months might look like. She cried some more, but it was the kind of crying that has a bottom to it, that comes up from something real and goes somewhere. By the end of the call, she was talking about practical things. A lawyer, her old apartment, whether her friend still had that spare room. I didn't tell her about the hotel until close to the end. There was a long silence when I finished explaining. Then, "You own the hotel." "Part of it," I said. "Majority. Stake." "The hotel where Thaddeus." "Yes." Another silence. Longer. "Dad," she said finally, and I could hear her trying to figure out what to say. "Did you plan all of this?" I thought about that honestly. "I planned the acquisition," I said. "That had been in the works for 18 months. I planned to bring forward the financial irregularities because that was my legal and ethical obligation as a prospective owner. I did not plan to walk into that lobby this morning and get dismissed by my son-in-law. That part was his contribution." She laughed. A real one again. "The thing is," I said, "even if none of this had happened the way it did, even if he'd been perfectly professional and kind and escorted me to a seat and offered me coffee, it wouldn't have changed anything. The documents would still have come. The acquisition would still have closed. The audit would still have found what it found. He built his own corner." "He always thought you were," she started. Then stopped. "Nothing," I said. "A nothing, I know. I'm sorry, Dad. You don't have anything to be sorry for. I let him talk about you that way. I didn't. Hey," I said, "you were surviving something. You don't owe me an apology for that. When you're in that situation, you make the calculations you have to make. I've never once blamed you." She was quiet for a while. Then, what was it like? In the lobby, when his boss came and told him, I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I wasn't there for that part," I said. "I wasn't there for that part," I said. "I was upstairs." "You weren't there." "No." She seemed surprised, maybe expecting something different. Some moment of confrontation or witnessed comeuppance. "I didn't need to be there for that part," I said. "I had already done what I came to do." That was true. It was fully true. I had not walked into that hotel to watch my son-in-law lose his job. I had walked in because I had financial documentation that implicated him in fraud that was hurting guests and staff, and because, as the incoming majority owner, I was the appropriate person to deliver it. What happened after that was a consequence of what he had built, not something I had constructed for my own satisfaction, though I will say, quietly, to myself, the way you admit the things you're not entirely proud of. There was a particular feeling in walking back through that lobby in the afternoon. Being addressed by name by the property director, being thanked by a guest who had seen how I was treated that morning. It was not pride exactly. It was more like the settling of something that had been unsettled for a long time. I stayed one night in the penthouse suite, and then drove home the next morning. My garden needed attention. Justice was in the kitchen, staring at his bowl with the specific expression of a dog who has decided that his owner's personal circumstances are not relevant to the matter of breakfast. I fed him. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the garden that needed work, and I thought about my wife, who had always said that the point of having resources was not the resources themselves, but the occasions they created for you to do the right thing. I think she would say I finally understood what she meant. 3 weeks later, my daughter and Petra moved into a rental house 2 miles from mine. It was small and bright and had a yard with a climbing structure that Petra immediately decided was a pirate ship. The first Saturday they were there, I brought over 2 boxes of things from storage. Some of my wife's old books, a lamp that I'd been keeping but never used, a kitchen table that had been sitting in my garage. Petra met me at the door in rain boots and a tutu. She was not going anywhere that required either of those things. She was just wearing them. "Grandpa," she said with great seriousness, "I have my own room." "I heard that," I said. "It has a window," she said. "All the best rooms do," I said. She considered this. "What did you bring?" she said, looking at the boxes. "Things," I said, "for your house." She nodded, satisfied, and ran back inside to show me where everything should go. I carried the boxes in, and my daughter made tea, and outside the afternoon was doing something gentle with the light, turning the yard that honey amber color, and Petra looked at it from the kitchen window and said, without looking away from it, "That's my favorite." Mine too, I thought. Mine too, I thought. Mine too.